Hello and welcome to the very first For Science segment of the Herbal Evolution podcast. I'm your host, Lila, and I'm very excited to kick off this segment format on my podcast. So, what we'll be doing is every other episode, every other week, we will be in our clinical, experiential mindset where we are testing herbs, supplements, lifestyle practices, and whatever else I come up with, we'll do it for a therapeutic or intensive amount of time, even if it's just a week, and then we come and we talk about it. So this segment will feature me flying solo sometimes, and other times I will bring on a guest where that guest will be taking the herb or supplement or doing the practice for a week at, again, a full therapeutic or intensive dose. And then we come and we talk about it. And the goal of this is to give you clinical insight in a new way. And the segment is called For Science because we get to experiment and really talk about these things in a new way. So this week, I am talking about the very fringe topic of nicotine pouches in particular, because these have had such an impact in the alternative health scene. And so we are going to talk about it. I dedicated my body to science and have been doing a lot of nicotine pouches, and I want to tell you about that experience and give you a little bit more insight into why nicotine pouches have become so popular and if there is any merit to them being used for treatment or biohacking or optimization. Upcoming episodes, we are doing one with my good friend Nick Medlock, a trainer, who will be doing high doses of turmeric with me, which I'm really excited about. We're going to be doing castor oil packs and lithium orotate and all kinds of herbs and really exciting things. So make sure to subscribe so you can get updates on those new episodes. Okay, so we're going to deep dive into nicotine. And I just want to preface this by saying I am not a smoker. To me, smoking is a bad, detrimental activity that I don't partake in. And a lot of people I know in my life don't partake in cigarettes, but nicotine pouches are seen differently, which is really curious to me. And I have some conspiracy theories that we'll be diving into eventually as the episode unfolds. So I just want to set the scene really quickly about why I picked nicotine pouches to talk about and to experiment with on myself. So there is this, I don't know what to call it other than like fringe bro science biohacking sect of people on the internet, health gurus or figureheads, and they're talking about all the benefits of nicotine. And I think the nicotine craze, from what I saw, really took off around COVID. And I pulled up some stats around this, and I found that Zyn, one of the biggest nicotine pouch brands, entered the market in 2014. So nicotine pouches have kind of been there in the background. They might have even been other companies that have been doing it before Zyn, but I know Zyn's pretty new, and then this other company, Alps, that's really big in this scene, is new. And between the years 2019 and 2022, nicotine pouch sales increased by 641%. And I think this was in part because there was some narratives going around that nicotine would help with COVID, prevent COVID, treat the symptoms of long COVID. And what I also found from my research was that the vaping epidemic was declining. And I theorized that pouches got promoted to fill that gap because big tobacco, these vaping companies, people need to make money moving certain types of product. And when the vaping trend was fading off, I think nicotine pouches were what was placed in front of us to make sure we're still doing something to keep us hooked. So there was a real shift in the way we started talking about nicotine, though. I mean, before these nicotine pouches and the way that these health gurus were talking about them, when I thought about nicotine patches or nicotine in any form like that, I thought about it just for people who were trying to quit smoking. nicotine gum, those kind of nicotine products come to mind. But when people like Andrew Huberman, Stanford neuroscientist, he has a huge podcast with a massive following, started talking about nicotine as a powerful cognitive enhancer. And it can be this brain boost. And then we have people like Dave Asprey, who's like the godfather of biohacking. He founded Bulletproof Coffee. I have thoughts on him, but I will save those for another day. Started calling nicotine a precision molecule for cognitive optimization. You have people like Joe Rogan and RFK Jr. and these Silicon Valley tech companies giving out nicotine pouches as a workplace perk. People started talking about nicotine on the internet as a miracle substance or something we could use to biohack the body and help it perform better. And I also noticed some narrative around nicotine reducing inflammation and nicotine helping to detox the body. And I've heard stories of people with children with high fevers giving their children nicotine to bring down the fevers and it helping. So we have all this information happening. We have this kind of like fringe health conscious group, biohacking group, optimization, performance enhancing group talking about nicotine. We have this general distrust of certain health organizations coming in post-COVID and it being talked about as a COVID treatment. And so all of these things I think have just kind of made us start looking at nicotine in a different life. So what I'm calling the nicotine lore that's being talked about is that nicotine improves focus, memory, cognitive performance in healthy adults. Nicotine pouches are a clean and tobacco-free alternative and therefore quote unquote safe. Nicotine may prevent diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It suppresses appetite and aids in body composition, aka weight loss. People talk about it as a harm reduction tool for existing smokers, and a lot of people say that it's not addictive or no more addictive than caffeine. And for the record, I think caffeine is super addictive. So nicotine is an alkaloid produced by certain plants in the Solanaceae family. The most famous plant I think we all know is tobacco, but nicotine is also found in small amounts in things like tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants, and peppers. Yes, those are our nightshades. And in these plants, it acts as a compound that defends the plant. It's bitter, it's toxic to insects at high doses, and it's historically been used as a pesticide, which I think is really, really interesting. I think it's worth touching on the use of tobacco in traditional indigenous medicine and ritual. I think that tobacco in its whole plant form, unadulterated, not extracted, is a different conversation than when we talk about any modern tobacco products like cigarettes and these nicotine pouches and everything in between. So I'm going to save that conversation for another time and say I think that when we are using the whole herb, when we are using it in ritual or in certain context, and we are not adulterating it, I think that's a different part of the conversation. So nicotine is an extract from this plant. Remember, anytime that we have a plant, this is an herbal podcast after all, the plant is balanced out by hundreds, if not thousands, of constituents. So every plant has all these different complexities to it. And in my opinion, plants are just so cleverly balanced. We're getting, a plant like nicotine might have something in it that's toxic to insects, but there might be something else in it that counteracts it when it's taken in its whole plant form in the human body. Like, think about a piece of fruit. There's a difference between us extracting fructose from fruit and simply eating fructose as a sugar. and us eating a whole piece of fruit that's going to be balanced out by different enzymes to help us break down the fruit and different nutrients and things like that. So we are talking about, when we're talking about nicotine and the tobacco plant, we're talking about the difference between an isolated constituent coming out of the plant and the plant in its whole form. So when we're taking a nicotine pouch, we're getting more nicotine. We're getting nicotine in a concentrated delivery system than we would ever get in nature, than we would ever get from eating potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, or even taking tobacco plants. So I think that's one thing worth considering, that when we isolate a constituent like that, we are turning that plant into a drug, because that's not how the plant would behave in nature, and that's not how a constituent like nicotine is going to behave in the whole plant, taken with all of the pieces together. As we have this conversation about nicotine, that's just something to think about. We are already so many steps removed from what we would ever find in nature. In my head, I remain open. I believe every substance is good for someone, probably poison to someone else. Like, every experience is so unique, and there's always good in the bad and bad in the good. So I am open to nicotine being a beneficial substance, which is why I was willing to use my body and do this for science segment on it. But I did come in with a prejudice or predisposition to thinking nicotine is addictive and harmful. I associate nicotine with cigarettes, and cigarettes are addictive and harmful. My very first experience with nicotine, I was at a kava bar one night. I had a really bad headache. Somebody found out I had a headache, and they're like, hey, so-and-so, give her a nicotine pouch. It'll help her headache. And I was like, okay, this headache sucks. I'm willing. I'm open. I tried this nicotine pouch. I put it in my mouth. It was this horrendous coffee flavor. It was a lower dose. I think it was only 2 milligrams. And I immediately start feeling like I'm gonna have a heart attack. Like, everything starts racing. My heart, my breath. I start feeling dizzy and woozy and nauseous. I will say my headache went away because all these other things started distracting me from it. I ended up leaving the kava bar, and I finally get to my car, and I like take the pouch out. Like, I'm smart enough finally to take the pouch out and go, oh, that was terrible. And about a year later, hanging out at my sister's house, everybody in her house was doing nicotine. And so it kind of piqued my interest again. And she's like, oh, try a pouch, try a pouch, try a pouch. And I finally broke down and tried a pouch, and I had a similar feeling. It was a lot, heart racing, nauseous, dizzy, all of the things. And I'd take the pouch out, and then I would kind of like start microdosing it. Like, I'd put the pouch in for a second and then take it out, and then put the pouch in for a second and then take it out. That was kind of my experience. There's, I think, something here I want to keep playing with and exploring, but overall, like, this doesn't immediately make me feel good. Fast forward, I don't do anything with nicotine for a couple months, and I go to help her in her office. She's a chiropractor, and she has a high volume office, and I go to help her for a week for some things, and the office is like super stressful. My routine really quickly became like, the afternoon slump would come, and I'd get offered a nicotine pouch, and I would take it, and it would help me focus and get my stuff done for the rest of the day. It would kind of energize me a little bit. It would help me focus. It would help my cognition. It would even out my mood. And a couple days into the week, I noticed I started looking forward to that nicotine pouch. And then later in the night, I'd want another nicotine pouch. So I had very quickly realized that it makes us feel a certain way, and I do think there's a chemical addiction piece, but I also think we get addicted to the feeling. I was, again, just kind of open, curious, exploring at this point, also with the big awareness of this is something that I will put down. It's not something I plan on being dependent on or anything like that. I play with it that week, and my dad ends up mailing me some at some point, and I try them again, knowing that I'm still interested in figuring out if this is overall net beneficial or negative. I play with them on and off for a couple months, and I limited myself to never doing more than 1 pouch at a day and at never crossing 3 milligrams. I started noticing a couple things. The first thing was I did like the way they made me feel. if I could get past the nausea, the dizzy, the hiccups, and the burping, and this like strong upward movement of energy that kept happening. Once I could get past that and like calm my body down enough to not react to them, I enjoyed the focus. I really, really enjoyed the oral fixation of just having the pouch in my mouth. I tend a little ADHD, and that gave me like a nice anchoring point, like in the way like gum would or something, but it wasn't with the jaw chewing that gum involves. Did enjoy that piece of it and the ritual of it, and just having something to give me a little boost, a little pick me up. As I'm again exploring these, one day I took a nicotine pouch and I could not stop hiccuping and hiccuping and hiccuping and hiccuping. And I Googled search, like, does nicotine have an upward moving energy? Because if we are looking at this substance from an energetic perspective, substances have inward moving energies, outward moving energies, upward moving energies, or downward moving energies. You know, think about caffeine and how coffee makes us have a bowel movement. That's a downward moving energy. Or you can think about something like a green banana and how it kind of has this like puckering effect in our mouth, and you know, it's astringent and it helps to pull things inward. I realized just from my own personal experience that nicotine, and my Googling to confirm, has an upward moving energy. And as I started to do some research and put together my theories, I'm guessing it's because your body is accepting it as a poison and trying to move it out. And so instead of letting it go downward and through the system, its immediate reaction is to bring it back up the quickest route, which would be through the mouth. I had a feeling like that was what was happening with this upward energy and the hiccuping and the burping and the vomiting. And I didn't vomit, but it would make me nauseous. That was the first thing I clocked. And then one day I realized I took a pouch and it made me really bloated, like really, really bloated. And I was like, well, this is abnormal. I was totally fine all day. I had a nicotine pouch and then I'm bloated. So I clocked that. And then my little sister throughout this time started vaping. We can judge her. We don't have to judge her, but we can judge her. And she's like, my period's late. Then I started thinking about it. I was like, well, my period's late too. And this is where I'm in my month of really experimenting with the nicotine. This led me to do some more research on these pouches. And I want to talk about a little bit about what I found. And I will just say, like, no judgment to people who use nicotine. I do think it might be a lesser evil than certain things in the world. I certainly don't think it's without harm or side effect. And it's one of those things where we might get a cognitive boost, but that cognitive boost might be coming at a cost. I kind of think about it like caffeine. Like when you're drinking morning coffee, it feels good, it's nice, but you are robbing from future energy stores. And the reason you need coffee is because there is a deficiency in your body. I think that the nicotine is compensating for a deficiency in your body, and it feels good in the moment, but in the long run is robbing from us in the same way that caffeine does. So that's my overall theory. And as I started digging deeper, I found some other interesting correlations with the things I was feeling and what the studies and information on nicotine has to say. First of all, I was using Alps, and there's two things I didn't know. I didn't know everything that was in it. I took it as face value because of the people I saw using it, the health gurus and people in my life and my circles. I took it at face value that it was a clean nicotine pouch. I thought it was like nicotine and some flavoring. And when I started to dig into it, I realized it was sweetened with sucralose. Sucralose is the generic name for Splenda, and what I believe to be a problematic, harmful, sugar-free alternative. So once I found out there was sucralose in it, that was something that made it a no-go in my head, and I stopped using them after that. But I was already ready to limit my use and be done with my experiment because of the bloating and the potential impacts on my menstrual cycle. In addition to the sucralose, there was a study done in 2022. 44 nicotine pouch products were tested. 26 out of the 44 contained carcinogenic chemicals. That's over half. And we all know that one of the reasons that cigarettes are so bad for us is because they're carcinogenic, and they have thousands of different chemicals in them that make them poison to our body. Some of these carcinogenic chemicals included ammonia, chromium, formaldehyde, and nickel. Zyn specifically tested positive for formaldehyde, chromium, and ammonia. This was in lower levels than other smokeless tobacco products, but it was not a clean alternative to cigarettes because there are still problematic ingredients. There's also the natural and artificial flavorings and sweeteners that are being used. There's something that's been flagged in some studies as a potential gut microbiome disruptor and insulin signaling disruptor, which we'll talk about more in a minute. There's also some other binders and fibers to help the nicotine do things like get it past the cell membrane twice as fast. So there's things that are specifically engineered in the pouches to make them hit hard and hit fast. I briefly want to touch on what nicotine does in the body because I think this dismantles the argument that nicotine isn't in fact addictive. I saw it from my limited usage with it that it was addictive. I wanted to increase my use, but there are also mechanisms that nicotine builds up in the body. So nicotine binds to these receptors we have, these acetylcholine receptors, and it mimics their behavior. But our body can't break down the nicotine, so that nicotine lingers. It overstimulates these receptors, it sensitizes us, and then we need more nicotine to feel it. So that starts this cycle of addiction and need and dependency. And it starts I start out at 2 milligrams to feel something, then I need 3 milligrams to feel something, now I need 6 milligrams to feel something. And that increases and reinforces the usage. So the other thing that happens is taking nicotine activates our dopaminergic reward system. It basically activates the same pathways, the same reward circuit as all of these other drugs that are constantly abused. When we take the nicotine, we do get a hit of the feel good. We get that focus, we get that calm, we get that mood boost. We are rewarded when we take the nicotine. So when we start using this regularly, our receptors start to upregulate to compensate for the dopamine being used. And then our baseline dopamine tone drops. So over time, we're getting more dopamine boosts than our normal, leaving us in a deficiency that the nicotine created. And then we start reaching for the nicotine to fix that dip that we feel. So we're rewarded, we get a high from the nicotine, then we feel low, then we reach for the nicotine again to get that high back. So it starts this cycle of dependency, this reward system. And then the other piece to this is when we stop doing nicotine, that withdrawal kickstarts a process of anxiety and emotional distress. And so we are incentivized to continue or to relapse or to take that nicotine again to avoid that. What I found really interesting through more of my research is that 73% of people who have tried nicotine pouches currently still use them. The average pouch user uses 8 to 12 pouches per day. That's 6 milligrams each. And so that equates to the amount of nicotine in 1 to 1.5 packs of cigarettes a day. The other thing that's really interesting is that most adults currently using pouches were never cigarette users to begin with. So we are promoting it as a safe alternative or safer alternative to cigarettes, but with the marketing, with the language we're using around nicotine, with all the benefits we're talking about, we've hooked people on a tobacco byproduct who would not have been doing it otherwise. So I think that's really interesting just to kind of step back and look at the whole picture of who's saying what and why we're saying it. I really believe there's a piece of this puzzle of nicotine pouches kind of stepped up to fill a void that declining cigarettes and vaping rates created. Now, I want to back up a little bit to the two things that I personally experienced, the bloating, and then my period being late, and my little sister doing another nicotine product, experiencing exact same symptoms. I found that nicotine does act as an endocrine disruptor in our bodies. An endocrine disruptor means a substance outside of us comes into our body and disrupts our endocrine system or hormones, for a really simple way to look at that. One of the things that nicotine does is it provokes a stress response in the body. It actually, in my opinion, causes inflammation. It causes a cortisol spike, and that elevates blood sugar, that affects our insulin production. It also specifically inhibits iodine uptake, which can worsen things like Hashimoto's and the way our thyroid is operating. Our hormones are really complex. They work in this orchestra where a hormone has to be signaled to be created. It has to be created. It has to be transported to where our body needs it. It then has to be utilized, and then it has to be disposed of. And it's a very fragile, delicate process with a lot of potential fail points. And when things come in our system that disrupt our own body's hormone signaling, it confuses our body. So it wasn't a surprise after I started digging that it could impact things like our hormone, or putting our body alone in a stressed state. That cortisol driven state, that fight or flight state, is going to first shut off things like our reproductive system, because when we're in a stressed survival mode, we are not fit to reproduce, and so that system gets shut off. That wasn't surprising to find out that it does disrupt our hormonal patterns and could potentially impact our menstrual cycles. And then the other thing I learned from my research and my own personal experience that led me to do the research is that nicotine alters gut motility, digestive hormone secretion, and the gut-brain axis. It also can lead to changes in gut permeability, so it can be associated with things like leaky gut. It can disrupt our microbiome, impacting things like lactobacillus populations. So think about your good bacteria, which just wasn't a surprise. And I think that these pieces are really being left out of the conversation. We're talking about all the benefits of nicotine, but we haven't been talking about, I mean, maybe it's just what I've been exposed to, but I don't see these same people talking about these other pieces of it. So I definitely personally felt the bloating and the hormonal impacts, and I felt the withdrawals and the addiction, or the want to take more and more nicotine. But on the other side of that, I will point out that I did feel good on it. It was fun to take. It did help me focus. It did help with cognition and energy and give me like a boost in the same way that coffee would. So I see why it's gained popularity. I see why people like to take it. I see how it feels good in the body. And I think there's no judgment if somebody does take nicotine or doesn't take nicotine. I think at the end of the day, we have to just sit with ourselves and ask, is the cost worth the benefit? Is what we are getting from the substance worth the benefit? And I will caveat that no substance on this planet is without a cost. Every medication, every herb, every supplement, it does good, and there is also going to be a negative effect. That's the yin and yang of everything in this world. There's good in the bad and bad in the good, and we have to decide for where we are in our health journeys and what we are exploring and experimenting with. Is it worth it for us? I have decided for me, nicotine is a no. If I were in a bind, if I were like, oh, I'm really dragging, I'm on a road trip, I don't know, maybe there's some emergency, or I'm trying to think of scenarios where like that pick me up would be worth the cost. But in my everyday, day-to-day life, it is something that I will choose going forward, that it's not for me. Now, somebody else in a certain situation, a healthy adult who's using nicotine as an alternative to smoking, yeah, it's probably a lesser evil. I would definitely put it on par with coffee, maybe a little more sinister than coffee, but I think it's just a really good example of the pros and cons of everything that we do, and the old adage, pick your poison. This isn't one that I would specifically recommend you go out and try for yourself, even if it is for science. It does not have my seal of approval, but I did enjoy the experimentation with it. and learning more about myself through this process. It probably, because it did feel so good to take nicotine, again, once I got past all the bad feelings, the hiccuping, the upward moving energy, the nausea things, it might have helped me compensate for something that I'm deficient in right now. And that's why it was nice, especially in that week in my sister's office where I was running depleted. It definitely bridged that gap between my depletion and what I needed to get done in the day. All of that to say is nicotine, although gaining popularity, is probably not something I'd recommend for the average person. But I would love to hear your experiences with it. Are you using it? Are you curious? Do you have questions? What's going on in your world? What's going on in your purview? What are you seeing people in taking or engaging with in this sphere? You can reach me at my email or leave comments. I'd really be curious to hear some other thoughts on this. And that was all for science. Next episode, next for science segment will be something fun. Next week, I have an episode coming out on the liver. We're going to deep dive on the liver and how to support it, how to love your liver, how to think about your liver, how impactful your liver is on a bunch of symptoms that you may be experiencing. We're going to talk about it from a few different lenses and give you some actionable stuff to do to really tune in and learn how to support and love your liver, because it is like the workhorse organ that is just underappreciated. And then we'll do another for science segment coming up after that I think will link back to the liver, and it'll be super exciting. Thank you for being here for our very first for science segment. I hope you enjoyed the nicotine spotlight, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.